Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Tian Yu. Coming up in this edition, Russian President Vladimir Putin agrees to halt attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure after a phone call with US President Donald Trump. Israel is warning of more attacks to come after launching airstrikes that killed over 400 Palestinians in Gaza. The presidents of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda voiced support for a ceasefire in the eastern DRC during talks mediated by Qatar. We begin with the latest phone call between US and Russian leaders. The Kremlin says President Vladimir Putin has agreed to halt attacks on energy infrastructure in Ukraine after a phone call with his US counterpart Donald Trump. Trump described the call as good and productive and said they agreed the three-year conflict needs to end with lasting peace. The White House says the U.S. and Russia will launch technical negotiations on conducting a maritime ceasefire in the Black Sea. The Kremlin statement insists that the key condition for peace is a complete cessation of Western military and intelligence support to Ukraine's military. It also emphasized that Kyiv could not rearm or mobilize during any ceasefire. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff has also confirmed further negotiations between American and Russian officials will take place in Saudi Arabia over the weekend. Nathan King reports from the White House.
So the headline is no full 30-day ceasefire, but the Russians have agreed to a 30-day ceasefire when it comes to targeting energy and infrastructure. That means Ukrainian cities not being hit, power not going out, and civilian casualties as a result, but still fighting on the front lines. Moscow's also said that in any ceasefire going forward, it would not want any weapons coming from the US or Western allies going to Ukraine, that they shouldn't be able to mobilize fresh troops either. They've agreed on a prisoner swap as well, and to set up teams to negotiate a full ceasefire and a permanent peace on the Russian and the US side to start negotiating in the Middle East as soon as possible. We have a White House statement here and also negotiating maritime ceasefire in the Black Sea as well. So no full ceasefire just yet, but definitely a step forward.
That was Nathan King following up on the phone call between Putin and Trump. Meanwhile, the Kremlin has emphasized Russia's key condition for peace, which is a complete cessation of Western military and intelligence support to Ukraine. Dasha Chernyshova explains.
The Kremlin said the sides continued a detailed and frank exchange of views on the situation around Ukraine, with Putin confirming a commitment to a peaceful resolution of the conflict. Moscow says a complete cessation of foreign military assistance and the provision of intelligence to Kyiv is the key condition for preventing the escalation of the conflict and working towards its resolution by political and diplomatic means. The Kremlin insists there are also serious risks associated with inability to negotiate with Kyiv's government, accusing it of sabotaging and violating the agreements reached. As a gesture of goodwill, Moscow will transfer to Kyiv 23 seriously wounded servicemen who are being treated in Russia. And on the 19th of March, Russian and Ukrainian sides will exchange 175 prisoners each. Moscow and Washington agreed to create expert groups to assist on the Ukrainian settlement.
That was Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky had said his country will consider supporting the plan to stop strikes on energy sites. He also said he wants to speak with Trump about the details of his discussions with Putin. Turning to the Middle East, Israel has warned of more attacks to come after launching airstrikes that killed over 400 Palestinians in Gaza. Tuesday's strikes shattered 2 months of relative peace since the first phase of the ceasefire took effect in January. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he ordered the strikes because Hamas had rejected proposals to extend the ceasefire agreement. Mediating countries Egypt and Qatar condemned the Israeli assault. However, the U.S. says Hamas is solely to blame because it chose refusal and war instead of a truce extension. Hamas accused Israel of jeopardizing efforts towards a permanent end to the conflict, but has not threatened to retaliate. Authorities in Gaza are still working to remove bodies from the rubble. Rami Amagari has more from Gaza.
In Gaza City, rescue operations have been crippled, have been impeded because of the fact that heavy machineries have not entered the Gaza Strip based on the ceasefire agreement reached between Hamas and Israel via mediation in late January. That's the situation. We have spoken to people earlier, and they told us that there are people trapped under the rubble, dead people, or maybe injured, maybe dead, maybe live, and they were not able to rescue them or to take them out. That is the scene here. Hundreds of people have been killed. Many others have been wrapped under the rubble because of the fact that the lack of the machineries and the truckloads and other equipment needed for the Palestinians to take out these bodies out of the rubble. Yes, that is regarding this. And this for the past 10 days, Israel has closed the border crossings and blocked the entry of those essential supplies into the territory.
That was Rami Amagari reporting on the latest developments in the Gaza Strip. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warns that the massive overnight strikes on Gaza are just the beginning, and future negotiations with Hamas will take place only under fire. Hundreds of Israelis have gathered in Tel Aviv to protest the renewed bombing in Gaza. Jonathan Regev reports from Tel Aviv.
Israeli sources, be it the Prime Minister's office, the Minister of Defense, the Chief of Staff, they're all saying Israel has now began what will be a military operation in steps, meaning this is the first step, and as long as Hamas does not go back to the negotiating table in order to move forward the Witkoff plan, which would allow the release of 11 living hostages and 16 hostage bodies. If that does not happen, Israel will go into the next step and basically escalate the operation. And that means that more people will have to be evacuated. Israel is saying this is just the first step, and more steps, harsher steps, will follow if Hamas does not return to the negotiating table, but not for the second phase of that original ceasefire deal, but for the Witkoff plan. This is what Israel is aiming for. So if we look at the international community, strong support from the United States, the American ambassador to the United Nations saying loud and clear that the collapse of the ceasefire should be blamed only on Hamas. This is due to the fact that Hamas refused to move along with the Witkoff plan. This is when we're speaking about Washington, but other powers, even close to Israel, such as the United Kingdom, such as Germany, they're careful to put blame on Israel, but they're saying that they're very concerned and that ceasefire should be implemented, the ceasefire should be put back on track as soon as possible. Other countries, such as Turkey, of course, are strongly blaming Israel. And as far as the Israeli society, just like every other thing, it seems that the Israeli society is very much divided on this issue.
That was Jonathan Regev reporting from Tel Aviv. At the United Nations, Israel has defended its decision to attack Gaza at a UN Security Council meeting. UN humanitarian chief Tom Fletcher briefed the Council on Tuesday as the Gaza situation escalates amid Israel's new strikes. Jody Jacobs reports from New York.
The overnight airstrikes on the Gaza Strip by Israel has Security Council members concerned. The United Nations too warning that the gains made during the 2-month ceasefire are being destroyed.
The return to hostilities overnight must cease. The suffering of the people of the region must end. A renewed ceasefire is the best way of protecting civilians in Gaza, in the OPT, and in Israel, releasing hostages and detainees, and allowing aid and commercial supplies in.
Tuesday's meeting was supposed to focus on Israel's blockade of aid into the enclave, but the fresh wave of attacks took center stage. Israel has defended its actions.
We stand firm in our commitment to return the hostages and defeat Hamas, and it's time for the international community to take our commitment seriously. We will bring home every lost hostage. Hamas has refused to release our hostages and repeatedly rejected all the offers both by the US and the mediating countries, even for the period of Ramadan. And thus, the return to fighting is a necessity.
Israel also sought to minimize its 2-week blockade of aid deliveries to the enclave. And it says claims that an electricity cutoff has plunged Gaza into humanitarian collapse are greatly exaggerated. But the United Nations reports otherwise. The world body insists that its ability to deliver assistance and basic services is becoming harder. According to the Palestinian health authorities, more than 400 people were killed during this fresh wave of violence. The Palestinian representative to the UN calling on the Security Council yet again to take action and force Israel to adhere to the ceasefire.
Help us. Act. We want peace. We have a plan. We have an alternative. We have options. It is crystal clear. Help us. Act with us. To make peace is the option of the world, and make war not acceptable and need to be stopped, and ceasefire to prevail.
As the calls for adherence to the ceasefire increase, China too has urged Israel to renounce what it calls its obsession with the use of force and to immediately cease its military operations in Gaza. It says the collective punishment of Gazans must stop.
That was Jody Jacobs reporting from the UN headquarters. Finally, in Africa, the presidents of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda have voiced support for a ceasefire in the eastern DRC as they met for talks mediated by Qatar. As the conflict continues, M23 rebels have chased people away from their villages in Goma. They had previously allowed the villagers to return to their homes. The rebels gave the internally displaced persons a 3-day deadline to comply. Sharon Banga has more.
1 month ago, internally displaced persons in eastern DRC found shelter and safety in the neighborhoods of Mugunga and Lakvat in Goma. But the camps are now empty. The Mugunga camp had approximately 100,000 internally displaced people living in this space of at least 500 square meters. There is nothing left of it. All the tents have been destroyed, and the last ones are being pulled down by locals after the displaced persons left. The M23 rebels had asked them to return to their homes, but later reversed that decision. The people affected are from the villages of Tuonane, Karenga, and Kamambu in Masisi territory.
I don't know what our problem was. I also went home, but after a week, they asked us to leave the place. They chased us out of our home. We had nothing else to do but save our lives. They didn't tell us our problem. They just gave us a time to leave, and we left. Let them allow us go back home or somewhere else we can go. We don't have a home of our own.
A little further in Sake, about 30 kilometers west of Goma, the Kamuranza Primary School compound is struggling to host nearly 300 families that fled Karenga. The area is under M23 control.
I don't know how much. I'm already very old. I stay at home. It was young people who had gone to Salango who brought us the message saying that the M23 had asked us to leave Karenga. I wondered what the problem was. I saw people start destroying their tents and huts in Tuonane, Kamambu and Karenga. We all fled out of fear, and that's why we're here.
Without humanitarian aid, the internally displaced persons face difficult days ahead. Many of them had hoped to resume rebuilding their lives when they arrived home after the fall of Goma. But now they face uncertain times after being chased away by M23 rebels. M23 is one of about 100 armed groups that have been vying for a foothold in mineral-rich eastern DRC near the border with Rwanda. The conflict has created one of the world's most serious humanitarian crises, with thousands killed and millions displaced. Efforts to bring to end the fighting in the region are ongoing, and for many of the families struggling just to get by as the violence rages on, that peace cannot come soon enough.
That was Sharon Banga reporting. Recapping today's headlines. Russian President Vladimir Putin agrees to halt attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure after a phone call with US President Donald Trump. Israel is warning of more attacks to come after launching airstrikes that killed over 400 Palestinians in Gaza. The presidents of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda voiced support for a ceasefire in the eastern DRC during talks mediated by Qatar. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports, and culture, you can subscribe to The Beijing Hour, a one-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Tian Yu. Thank you for listening.